So, as the chairman of India's largest steel producing company, what are the challenges that you see when it comes to the steel sector, and steel sectors need to become sustainable?
Steel makers talking about green 6 times more vigorously than so that's the level of importance that we attach to decarbonization. You want to be green, cost will increase, but there are different models to achieve that greenness. And all the steel makers across the world are looking at various options of how to.
Do you think a country like India with about $27 to $2,800 per capita income, we are in a position to consume green steel, which will perhaps cost higher?
Cost of steel in a luxury goods sector, yes. When it comes to low-cost housing development in India, no. So naturally, as steel makers, we are also worried about cheap steel getting dumped into India from certain countries. We need to guard our steel industry through that.
Hello and welcome to C Cube, the first edition of Outlook Planet's Sustainability Conference. To discuss sustainability, today we have with us Mr. Amarendu Prakash. He is the chairman of Steel Authority of India Limited. Welcome to C Cube, sir.
Thanks, Neeraj. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Prakash, since you are here at our sustainability conference, and steel is one of those hard to abate sectors in terms of sustainability. So, as the chairman of India's largest steel producing company, what are the challenges that you see when it comes to the steel sector, and steel sectors need to become sustainable?
Neeraj rightly put, it's a hard to abate sector and the whole world recognizes this. At the same time, steel industry recognizes the challenge that the world faces, because to us decarbonization is not a challenge for one company or one industry or one nation for that matter. It's a challenge that the world faces, and we all need to put our best step forward in order to control this. Across the world, just giving you an example of 6 months ago, I was with a World Steel Association meeting in Brussels, and in that room, trust me, all the steel makers of the world for 2 days, the word green was mentioned 6 times more than the word steel. Imagine the steel makers talking about green 6 times more vigorously than steel.
All right.
So that's the level of importance that we attach to decarbonization. It is driven by a two-pronged approach. One is on improving efficiency and doing innovation in order to bring down the carbon levels of the steel making industry. At the same time, we are actively pursuing groundbreaking technologies, new technologies, uses of hydrogen, uses of less carbon intensive routes in order to produce our steel and thereby reduce the carbon intensity.
Sir, you have just got into a partnership with BHP for using hydrogen in producing green steel. Could you just tell us more about the use of hydrogen, and how do you plan to use it to bring down your emission levels?
So Neeraj, basically when we say we use coal or gas to produce steel, basically we want a reductant. Steel is produced by mining iron ore from Mother Earth, and iron ore is nothing but iron oxide. Our whole challenge lies with removing the oxygen from the iron to produce steel. So in order to use a reductant, coal is cheapest and the most efficient, has been cheapest and the most efficient for more than a century now. The blast furnace technology has been there more than a century. And science says that hydrogen can act as a reductant just as well. Without emitting CO2, you get H2O, in fact, steam. So people have been working on the science of hydrogen is very well established, but the technology of using hydrogen in a large steel making operation is yet to be established. There have been multiple attempts across the world. Some people are still planning projects on that. With BHP, our partnership is about exploring all these areas. It is not just hydrogen, but also other areas. Use of hydrogen, one of the imperatives is to use high-grade iron ore, that is more than 65% Fe iron ore in order to produce steel. With BHP, we are exploring various channels and various technologies, evaluation and maybe a pilot at a later stage to establish this technology before we put in all the capex into making such steel plants.
Mr. Prakash, the comparable global average emission intensity is pegged around 1.85 tons of CO2 per ton of crude steel, whereas Indian steel industry emission intensity hovers around the 2.5 mark. By when do you think India can achieve the global levels of intensity. Yeah.
Intensity. So steel, when you see steel is produced basically through 3 routes across the world. One thing is the blast furnace and steel making route. Second thing is the DRI, directly reduced iron plus electric arc furnace route. And there is a third route which is induction furnace route. In India, if you look at the mix of steel being produced, you will find that about more than 50% of the steel is produced in the secondary sector, in the smaller MSME sector, where it is mostly dominated by induction furnace route.
Right.
So because of this is one reason why Indian steel industry emissions are higher than the world steel averages as such. As India grows forward and the capacities need to grow, you all know today India is at 180 million ton. Ambition is to go to 300 million ton steel capacity by 2030, in next 6 years' time. This mix of secondary route versus the primary blast furnace route is not going to change by a huge margin.
Okay.
So we will have to focus on, when we go to induction route or when we go to coal-based DRI production, there are 2 solutions to this. Induction furnaces have to switch to renewable power. In this, I'm happy to report that India's renewable power ambition is going at a very good pace, and in fact, we are ahead of the world, so to say, in renewable power. So there you will see a definite change. The second change that you will see will be in coal-based DRI. Can it switch to gas-based DRI, which will be less intensity of carbon? And finally, can we switch to hydrogen? Now, there is the question of high-grade iron ore availability. India has sufficient iron ore to produce all the steel that it wants, but not high-grade iron ore. India does not have gas.
Right.
So these 2 things today, very interestingly, it is no longer a question of India. We steel makers are now thinking about whether a steel plant is going to remain a steel plant, in the sense that in a typical steel plant, you take iron ore, make it into iron, then make it into steel, roll it out and push out the finished product. Today we are talking about, maybe I will mine iron ore in India, take it through a ship to Middle East, use the cheap gas there to convert that into iron, bring that iron back to India and then produce from there.
But will it not increase the cost of production?
It will increase the cost of production, but then getting gas from Middle East to this place and buying iron ore from another country to get the high-grade iron ore will be even costlier. So climate change is something which is important, and the costs are going to increase. If you want to be green, costs will increase, but there are different models to achieve that greenness. And all the steel makers across the world are looking at various options of how to go about it.
Of course, Mr. Prakash, as you said, that the cost of green steel will be higher compared to the current steel that the world is using. Do you think a country like India, with about $2,700 to $2,800 per capita income, we are in a position to consume green steel, which will perhaps cost higher? It's a very big question.
If you're buying a BMW or a Mercedes, yes. And this is a dialogue, Neeraj, which is happening across the world. It is not just about India. Just last week, I was in Europe in a conference where they were talking about reducing the carbon intensity of steel industry in Europe.
Right.
And so the solutions getting discussed there was more scrap uses, more higher grade iron ore uses. When it comes to market, even the European steel makers, I asked them, who is ready to get you a premium for hydrogen-based steel making or low-carbon steel making, and they said the auto industry. You know, except for the auto industry, where the total cost of steel in a car is quite low. So making a change of 10% or 12% to the cost of steel in a luxury goods sector, yes. When it comes to low-cost housing development in India, no. That challenge.
Who is the largest consumer of sales steel? Is it the automobile sector or the construction?
It is railways first, and the government second, because of the whole infrastructure push which is there. So a lot of steel goes into making your airports, making your railway stations, making your roads.
That's public infrastructure. The cost of public infrastructure will go up, definitely. So do you think that, because currently the global order is changing, and there are a lot of trade negotiations happening across the world. Different countries are getting into FTA. Our own government is going to different parts of the world to negotiate the new trade deals. Do you fear some sort of negative policy impact that can impact the Indian steel makers? And if yes, what are the suggestions that you have been sharing with the government to ensure that the interests of Indian steel makers and India Inc. are protected?
Past 1.5 months have been challenging and volatile across the world, as you mentioned. And the first thing that the President Trump, after taking over, said was, I'm going to impose a tariff on steel and aluminum first.
Right.
And if you remember the first term of President Trump, during that tenure, he had made a statement, if you don't have steel, you don't have a nation. While invoking the national security policy of United States, he mentioned that I'm going to impose a duty on steel because my national security is threatened. That's the importance of steel to a country,
right?
Normally. So naturally, as steel makers, we are also worried about cheap steel getting dumped into India from certain countries. We need to guard our steel industry through that. Today, India is trying to grow from 180 million ton to 300 million ton capacity in double quick time. So imagine every million ton of steel capacity probably takes $1 billion to install. So if we are talking about going from 180 to 300, India needs $120 billion just to install the next wave of capacity installation in steel. If we, at this stage, when all that capital will be required to install the capacity, if you add green to this, this further increases the capex requirement.
Right.
And so steel industry will want to get certain level of protection to ensure that it has some money in hand. Only when capital formation takes place through some margins in steel, only then the industry will be capable of doing this transition, increasing capacity at the same time going green. So we are also in talks with the government, and government is considering some safeguard duty. We are not asking for favors. What we say, we just want a level playing field. So for example, you see steel is a very logistics for a steel movement. If I make 1 ton of steel, I move 3.5 million ton of raw material, and then 1 ton of steel goes out. So for 1 ton of steel, you are basically moving 4.5 million ton. India logistics costs are among the highest in the world.
Right.
So we need to see how do we bring that down. There are certain duties we already pay. When we mine iron ore, we pay a royalty. When we buy our electricity, there are electricity duties across the country in different countries.
Right.
There are other countries where these are not an issue. These costs are not added to that. So we just want a level playing field, and we have, Niti Aayog had calculated a few years ago, about $80 per ton of steel is the cost of, which does not come from us. We do not do that. It comes from logistics, electricity duties, mining duties. There are many duties. So we just want protection to the extent that a country which does not need to incur these costs, we should be given a protection equivalent to that. So that's our argument with the government, and the government is considering it.
So we have seen the issue that you have raised, that there is very high logistic cost that most of the industry people pay, not just the steel sector, but other automobile sector and other sectors. Why do you think this has happened? Because I believe the cost of electricity has remained very high. Earlier there was no electricity at all. Now that we are getting, especially in urban areas, the government has managed to ensure that there is 24/7 electricity available. But the cost of electricity, especially for the commercial sector, has been very high. Despite the fact that now we have, as you mentioned earlier, that we have one of the highest growth in the renewable energy sector, still the cost for commercial sector has not come down the way it should have. Is there a specific requirement that you have made with the government that the cost of electricity should come down?
Fundamentally, Neeraj, if we look at this, when you invest into, electricity generation is not costly.
Right.
It is the electricity transmission which is a cost, because the losses come in and everything.
And they have been going up of late.
They have been going up. But then you see, if you want to transport electricity, if you want to go solar, for example, the best places are Rajasthan and Gujarat, the best sunlight that you receive there. But then when you are producing electricity during the day in Rajasthan, and you want this electricity to be available round the clock across the country, say in a city like, say, Rourkela, for example, you won't get it. You will have to put in place the infrastructure for power transmission. And initial load of that capex, the cost goes up when you are still putting infrastructure. When you have infrastructure which has been there for 30 years, then the cost of that capital and the depreciation comes down. Then the electricity cost will start tapering off. So that's one, why you find that electricity costs remain high. It is more than the cost of generation, it is basically the cost of transmission and all the losses. Another interesting point, exactly related to this, I'll give you example of Germany. Germany came up with a huge renewable capacity. When you have renewable capacity based on solar, so in the day you are producing electricity, in the night you don't have that electricity. So that will mean you will need to run your thermal power plants. Now, thermal power plants costs come down when you run it continuously. When you run it intermittently, their cost is going to go up. So in fact, one thing getting debated, and in India we will also need to debate it at some stage, will be what is the ideal mix of renewable versus thermal that we need to go with. Because as the renewable costs come down, the thermal costs are going to go up.
Yeah, I think currently we have a 30:70 ratio. We want it like 50:50 ratio.
Yeah.
But it is going to be difficult because thermal power plant, anyway, they are the most inefficient power plants in the world. And now that the world does not want to invest in coal, of course, the new technology, the latest technology was supercritical power plants that were very efficient, but nobody will invest more in the R&D. So they will remain inefficient.
I'll stop you there and say nobody will invest is not the question. Question is whether I have the money to invest. So we need to generate capital. That's why, as I was saying, that steel makers need to generate capital. I have to have some margins in order to generate the capital.
So like how much, what amount of your, maybe the bottom line are you investing in R&D? If you could just put a percentage to that.
It is about considering 0.7% of my turnover goes towards R&D, not my profits.
Okay, all right.
In terms of profit, it is much higher. In terms of profit, it will be probably 5 to 7%.
5 to 7%. Is it below the industry average or the like above industry average?
It is at par with the industry average in India. If we look at the world, it may be slightly less because we are primarily into BF-BOF route of production, which is a fairly well-established technology. But in recent times, we have been increasing our R&D expenditure to look into research on hydrogen and other carbon capture and storage technologies also. So it is going to go up.
Sir, I just want to understand one thing from you. Like right now, there are so many green tech technologies in the world, and as the chairman of SAIL, would you not be just going crazy thinking about what technology should I invest in? Because you would be getting so many presentations. Everyone would be wanting, buy this from us and invest in this thing. How do you keep yourself sane dealing with these many technologies? Because you are living in very interesting times. All of us are. So what is the situation like as a chairman of SAIL? How do you deal with this? How do you cut the noise?
So interesting, exciting and frightening times. Let me qualify it, all three. We have currently in SAIL, we have 19 different MOUs working on different technology, exploring different technologies of decarbonization that we have. We are in touch with IITs, we are in touch with BHP as you mentioned, we are in touch with John Cockerell, we are in touch with all the steel technology suppliers across the world. Teams are traveling the length and breadth of the world trying to find out what is happening where. However, the important thing for us, how do we keep ourselves sane, is to look at technology, invest in research, but at the same time evaluate it critically before applying. The dilemma and the sleepless nights that we go through are should we leave the blast furnace route and should we switch to DRI, electric arc furnace route? Not an easy question. I was in Europe last week and we found them debating this and we found them trying to switch. Europe, as you know, has stated an ambition of going net zero much earlier than India. But then I found the steel makers there talking about dedicating 10% or 15% of their capacity to the new route and not going whole hog. So India is going to probably be following the same pathway. We have been debating on a 3 million ton steel plant capacity whether to continue with the blast furnace route or switch to EF route. And that's why I mentioned we have been having thoughts about taking our iron ore to Mid East, converting it to DRI, bringing it back. So all those questions are there. We sleep easy because we don't have a lot of money. So lots of questions will be answered as we start getting money. Then you get into all those options.
Yeah.
But having research behind us, having the knowledge on this is important. So we believe that we must have the knowledge.
But have you increased the amount of time in strategizing on the new technologies that you should be adopting compared to what it was 10 to 20 years ago?
Absolutely, absolutely. Till 10, 20 years ago, it was all a question of efficiency. Just cut down the costs anywhere, save on coal, use less energy was the only question. Today we are talking about transformation. So switching from, say, coal to gas, or switching from gas to hydrogen. So those are questions, and mind you, if you invest in a steel plant, you want it to run for at least 20, 25 years. You do not recover the cost in merely by running it for 5 years.
Sector.
Very capital intensive sector. So we have to take a reasoned and very deliberated call on such things. So we spend a lot of time on that. What I'll say is we are not giving up on everything. Why I have 19 MOUs is I don't want to miss out on any opportunity.
Right.
So you have knowledge of everything. While taking a business call, you look at your pocket, you look at the needs of the industry, and then take a call. But don't ignore knowledge.
Right. So, do you interact with the Prime Minister or the Commerce Minister on a regular basis? Because there is a lot of things which are happening, internationally as well as domestically. Do you talk to them regularly, or you are just,
I'm just a businessman, Neeraj, so we do not get the opportunity of talking to them regularly. However, we do discuss points of importance up to Commerce Minister and Finance Minister level from time to time. The major steel makers of the country also have a forum, so we have an India Steel Association. Under that umbrella, we time to time meet them, apprise them of what is happening across the world, and also seek their support and blessings in making sure that Indian steel industry is not going to lag behind when it comes to either economic expansion or the journey to being green.
So, all right, sir, this is all that we have from C-Cube, and thank you very much for coming here to talk to us today. I would just request you to say that beautiful line, the tagline that I've always liked about you, that there is a little bit of SAIL in each one of us. So, I've always felt enamored with this tagline. I don't know who created this thing, but when you just read that line, that tells us something about the importance of steel and SAIL in our lives.
थैंक यू नीरज, थैंक्स फॉर हैविंग मी. जैसा कहते हैं हर किसी की ज़िंदगी से जुड़ा हुआ है सेल. एंड लेट मी जस्ट ऐड अनदर लाइन टू दिस विच वी यूज़ फॉर आवर CSR स्लोगन, हर आँख में चमक इस बात की. So along with being in your lives, we also want the light in your eyes to reflect the strength and resilience of steel that we produce. Thank you so much.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for coming.